they'll say to me, "You've never written a book. How did this start?" And it started simply because my husband and I live on the Tennessee River. We have some raw farmland, and I knew at one time there was a town there called Taylorsville. And it was extremely important to Huntsville because of the cotton. Cotton was collected downtown, put on train cars, sent down to Taylorsville, and that's where the train cars were loaded up on barges, and thus the cotton was distributed worldwide out of this little bitty town of Taylorsville. There's not much left of it. There's the founder's home and an old fallen down general store, and a little bit is left of the train trestle. So I knew about this, but what began my journey was I discovered a man was lynched on my property 100 years ago. I couldn't let it go. I wanted to know why. What did he do so bad to get lynched? I couldn't let this go. I wanted to know, was he married? Did he have kids? What happened to the guys that did it? Were they married? Did they have kids? Did they have a mom? And all these things kept rattling around in my head till finally I thought, enough of this. I will go to the library and start reading things about Huntsville. And I was fortunate enough to meet lots of helpful people, volunteers at the library, and they showed me through the old newspapers during that time period, through court cases, even probate cases, murder trials, you name it, I read it. For 6 months I stayed in that library looking for this crime. And I eventually did find it, but not before I found many other things that happened in Huntsville that I didn't know anything about, and I imagine a lot of other people didn't. So my head started spinning and the creativity started going, and I thought, well, I could write a book. I've never written a book, but you know, it's a challenge. I'll see if I can do it. And so I discovered things in Huntsville, such as the murder of a judge. Alabama was dry during this time period in 1915 and 1916. And the judge was in a recent election, and his opponent met him at the courthouse, picked him up and took him to Ditto Landing, which is a marina now, but at the time it was just a landing where supplies and things were brought into Huntsville. But the murderer took him to the judge to that old steel bridge at the marina and murdered him there. And then 3 days later, they found his body. And immediately, the sheriff at the time committed suicide. And so did the district attorney, because they were implicated in the murder. Also, the police chief resigned immediately. His taxi cabs were the ones coming to the river to pick up the booze. Alabama being dry, the politicians had their hands all involved in on the bootlegging money while they arrested the poor moonshiner down the road. And so eventually they caught the man that murdered Judge Lawler up in Chattanooga. They had a trial in Huntsville, and it was a three-ring circus of the day. The population of Huntsville was maybe about 8,000 people, but there were newspapers from Miami, New York, Los Angeles, Chicago, Seattle, all camped out in this little bitty town because they found it fascinating. There was murder, there was alcohol during, a dry time in Alabama, and, it was political, and so it was something to cover. And of course, they infiltrated the jurors, and they eventually did convict the man of murdering Judge Lawler. And so while he appealed the case, they put him in Birmingham for fear he would break out of jail in Huntsville. He knew a lot of people. He had friends and he had enemies. So while he was safely tucked away in Birmingham, guess what? He broke out of jail to a car that had cash, guns, and tickets to head to South America. But he didn't make it out of Birmingham before he gets in a shootout with the police and he gets killed. And this is all true. And I wonder, who was it that helped him? Was it a friend trying to help him get out of the country? Was it his enemy that didn't want him back in Huntsville and knew he would be set up? So we'll never know about that. But back to the man that was lynched. His name was Herman Dealey, and he was a black man that was lynched by 3 prominent white men. And as horrible as this story is, there is a silver lining, Alan, and that would be the prosecutor in Huntsville at the time. He went against all societal norms and challenged these 3 men and had a murder trial. He did. There were 20 witnesses that saw the crime. They were in the trial too, and they still got off the hook. But here's the silver lining to this story. The prosecutor was so brave that he took on society and said no more. That was the very last lynching in Madison County to this day. So he probably saved many lives. Even though he lost that case, and Herman Dealey lost his life senselessly, I feel like I wanted to dedicate the book to Herman Dealey, because I would have never written a book. It wasn't in me. But the passion to find out about this man. So like I said, I dedicated it to him. He will be paid homage for years and years to come. No one will forget Herman Dealey now. I won't.